Hey man, the word loser is one of the most misunderstood labels a man can wear. People hear it and think failure, weakness, giving up. But the version of loser that flips the entire dating game on its head is the man who has lost something else entirely, his need to be approved, validated, or emotionally sponsored by women. And once that need dies, something strange happens. The pressure disappears, the performance stops, and suddenly women feel different around you. When a man stops trying to win, impress, or prove anything, he becomes unpredictable in a way that cuts straight through emotional defenses. He's no longer trying to be chosen. He's no longer auditioning for affection. He's no longer tailoring himself to be palatable. And that absence of effort reads as confidence, not the loud kind, but the kind that doesn't ask for permission to exist. This is why men who've lost socially, romantically, or emotionally often report something counterintuitive. Women stop resisting them, not because the man improved on paper, but because he stopped chasing outcomes. His energy shifts from trying to get to being unaffected, and emotional systems, especially female ones, are extremely sensitive to that shift. A man who believes he has nothing to lose doesn't negotiate attraction. He doesn't escalate awkwardly. He doesn't overinvest early. He doesn't cling to responses or read meaning into silence. He treats attention casually because it no longer defines him, and that casualness feels rare in a world full of men who are starving for reassurance. This is the uncomfortable truth. Women are not repelled by men who fail. They're repelled by men who need. Neediness signals dependence. Dependence signals weakness, and weakness demands emotional labor. The loser who has accepted his position, stopped posturing, and made peace with himself no longer transmits need, he transmits freedom. That freedom removes tension from interactions. Conversations stop feeling like negotiations. There's no agenda hiding behind compliments, no pressure behind interest, no expectation attached to attention. And without pressure, women relax. Without expectation, they open. What feels like women becoming easy is actually women feeling unthreatened. Most men don't realize how much their desire contaminates their presence. The moment a man wants something from a woman, approval, validation, sex, commitment, his behavior shifts, his tone changes, his reactions sharpen, his patience thins. The loser who has given up wanting doesn't leak that energy, and that absence is felt immediately. This is why men who've been humbled by life often do better with women than men who are still trying to prove they're winning. The humbled man doesn't posture, he doesn't exaggerate, he doesn't sell a future, he stands where he is. And paradoxically, that grounded acceptance reads as authority. Women don't become easy because you lower your standards or degrade yourself. They become easy because you stop trying to extract something from them. You stop viewing them as a solution to emptiness. You stop building fantasies around outcomes. And when that happens, interaction becomes simple, fluid, unforced. So when men say, "Once I became a loser, women became easy," what they're really saying is this: once I stopped needing women to validate my worth, they stopped feeling the burden of carrying it. And that shift, quiet, internal, irreversible, is what changes everything. What most men never admit is that their biggest obstacle with women was never looks, money, or status. It was the invisible weight of expectation they carried into every interaction. Expectation poisons presence. It makes a man lean forward when he should stand still. It makes him explain when silence would do more. The so-called loser drops that weight, not as a tactic, but as a surrender. And that surrender resets the entire dynamic. Once you stop trying to be impressive, you become interesting. Once you stop chasing approval, you become unchaseable. The irony is brutal. The moment you stop positioning yourself as a prize to be claimed, women start testing whether you actually are one. Not because they're cruel, but because indifference signals value more reliably than effort ever could. A man who has accepted loss carries a different rhythm. He doesn't rush, he doesn't feel silence, he doesn't perform optimism. He's already faced disappointment, already been stripped of illusion, already made peace with outcomes not going his way. And that calm, battle-worn acceptance reads as depth in a world full of men pretending to have it all together. This is why women often open up faster to men who seem emotionally detached from outcomes. They sense there's no hidden contract, no unspoken demand, no expectation that interest must be returned or escalated. The interaction feels clean, and clean energy creates safety, even when attraction is present. The man who still believes he's winning is often the most tense. He has something to protect, an image to maintain, a trajectory to justify. The loser has none of that. He's already fallen, already recalibrated, already stripped his identity down to what remains when applause disappears, and what remains is usually authenticity, raw, unpolished, and rare. Women don't respond to confidence as loudly as they respond to non-attachment. Non-attachment signals that you are not emotionally dependent on their reaction, that you won't collapse if they pull away, that you won't inflate if they lean in. And emotional neutrality is magnetic because it offers freedom instead of pressure. This is where men misunderstand ease for weakness. They think being relaxed means being passive, but relaxed men are dangerous in a different way. They see clearly. They don't chase illusions. They don't confuse attraction with validation. And because they're not trying to extract something, women often give freely. When you've already lost, rejection loses its power. Silence stops stinging. Mixed signals stop confusing you. You don't personalize behavior that was never about you. And that emotional resilience creates a dynamic where women feel less control and paradoxically more curiosity. The truth is, women don't become easy because you lower yourself. They become easy because you stop elevating them above reality. You meet them where they are, human, imperfect, unscripted. And when you remove the pedestal, conversation becomes natural instead of performative. So the man who calls himself a loser isn't broken, he's recalibrated. He's no longer selling himself a story about how things should be. He's living in how things are. And once you operate from that place, attraction stops feeling like a struggle and starts feeling like gravity. What really shifts is the way you move through interactions. You're no longer scanning for signals, searching for permission, or adjusting yourself in real time based on her reactions. You speak when there's something to say. You go quiet when there isn't. And that restraint changes the entire temperature of the room. People feel it instantly, even if they can't explain why. Men underestimate how loud internal desperation is. It leaks through posture, pacing, tone, timing. It shows up in how fast you reply, how much you explain, how carefully you try to be understood. When that desperation dies, your presence becomes heavier, slower, more deliberate, and emotional systems respond to that weight automatically. You stop framing interactions as opportunities and start seeing them as experiences. No pressure to convert a moment into something more. No anxiety about where things are headed. You let conversations breathe. You let curiosity replace expectation. And that freedom makes people lean in, not because you're pulling them, but because you're no longer pushing. There's a calm confidence that only comes after disillusionment. It's not optimism. It's not bravado. It's the calm of someone who has already faced disappointment and survived it intact. That calm doesn't need to be announced. It shows up in how you listen without trying to impress, how you disagree without escalating, how you walk away without resentment. At this stage, attraction stops feeling like a goal and starts feeling like a side effect. You're not strategizing, you're not rehearsing, you're not trying to create chemistry, you're simply present. And presence, real presence, is rare. Most people are too busy managing impressions to actually be there. Women sense when a man isn't trying to extract something from them. No validation, no reassurance, no outcome. That absence creates psychological safety, and safety opens doors that effort never could. Not because you're passive, but because you're grounded enough to let things unfold without force. You also become harder to manipulate, not because you're guarded, but because you're no longer emotionally invested in outcomes you can't control. Mixed signals don't hook you. Tests don't derail you. Silence doesn't provoke you. And when reactions disappear, power dynamics shift quietly. What once felt like rejection now feels like information. You don't personalize it, you observe it. You note behavior and adjust your involvement accordingly. That emotional discipline keeps you centered, and people feel centered around you as a result. This is where things get misunderstood from the outside. People assume you figured something out or unlocked some secret, but the truth is simpler. You stopped bargaining with reality. You stopped needing things to go a certain way to feel okay, and that internal alignment changed how others experience you. When you operate from this place, interactions lose their edge. There's no tension to resolve, no role to perform, no image to defend, and without realizing it, people start meeting you where you are. Not because you demanded it, but because you made it possible. At this point, you stop needing momentum to feel confident. You're no longer fueled by attention or discouraged by its absence. You move at your own pace, unconcerned with how quickly things develop, or whether they develop at all. That internal patience creates a strange effect. People feel less pressure around you, yet more curiosity. You're no longer chasing connection, you're allowing it to reveal itself naturally. You begin to notice how rare emotional self-sufficiency really is. Most people are broadcasting hunger to be seen, chosen, reassured. When that hunger disappears from you, your presence feels clean, uncluttered. There's no invisible tug of war, no hidden agenda, and that clarity is disarming. Conversations start to flow differently. You're not trying to steer them toward a result. You're not filling silence to avoid discomfort. You let pauses exist. You let moments end when they end. And that restraint signals something powerful. You trust yourself enough not to force continuity. This is where attraction quietly rearranges itself, not through effort, but through contrast. Against a backdrop of constant seeking, stillness stands out. Against over-explaining, simplicity feels confident. Against emotional volatility, steadiness feels rare. You don't need to announce value when your behavior already reflects it. You also stop taking things personally. Disinterest doesn't wound you. Distance doesn't provoke you. You understand that most behavior is an expression of someone else's internal state, not a verdict on your worth. That understanding frees you from emotional whiplash and makes you far more difficult to shake. What changes most is your relationship with uncertainty. You no longer rush to resolve it. You don't need clarity immediately. You allow situations to unfold without interference. And paradoxically, when you stop demanding certainty, it arrives faster because no one feels cornered. People sense when you're not trying to be liked. There's no flattery layered with expectation, no charm aimed at extraction, just authenticity, unfiltered and unforced. That authenticity doesn't appeal to everyone, but it resonates deeply with the few who are capable of meeting it. You also become selective without being judgmental. You observe how people handle discomfort, disagreement, and silence. You notice patterns instead of promises. And when something doesn't align, you disengage quietly without drama, without explanation, without resentment. This quiet disengagement is what most people aren't prepared for. They're used to reactions, questions, arguments, persuasion. When none of that arrives, they're left alone with their own assumptions, and that absence of reaction often says more than any confrontation ever could. By now, you've internalized a simple truth. When you're no longer trying to extract meaning from attention, attention stops feeling like currency. It becomes optional. And when something becomes optional, it loses its power over you while simultaneously becoming easier to receive. By now, you start noticing how little effort it takes to stand out when you're no longer trying to. You're not louder than others, you're not sharper or flashier, you're simply not chasing approval, and that absence creates contrast. In a world filled with men reaching forward, the one who stands still becomes noticeable without asking to be seen. You also realize that emotional economy matters more than emotional display. You don't spend energy where it isn't returned. You don't invest attention, hoping it will multiply. You place it deliberately, calmly, without attachment. And because your attention isn't cheap or reactive, it carries weight when you offer it. This is where many interactions quietly reverse. Instead of you wondering where you stand, others start adjusting to your pace. Instead of seeking reassurance, they begin offering it, not because you demanded anything, but because you removed the urgency that made everything feel transactional. You stop explaining yourself preemptively. You let misunderstandings exist without rushing to correct them. You trust that those who are aligned will understand you over time, and those who aren't were never meant to. That trust removes the need to manage perceptions, which frees your mind in ways most people never experience. There's also a subtle shift in how you listen. You're no longer listening to respond or impress. You're listening to understand patterns, values, consistency. You hear what's said and what's avoided, and that awareness allows you to engage without illusion. Moments that once felt heavy now feel light. Silence no longer demands filling. Pauses don't create anxiety. You let interactions end naturally, trusting that anything meant to continue will. This patience communicates confidence without words, and people feel it immediately. You begin to value quality over quantity, not just in connections but in energy. Fewer conversations, deeper presence, less noise, more intention. And that refinement doesn't isolate you, it filters your world down to what actually nourishes you. What surprises most men at this stage is how attraction becomes cooperative instead of competitive. There's no sense of proving, no hidden scoreboard. Things either flow or they don't, and if they don't, you let go without internal resistance. This calm acceptance removes the edge from rejection entirely. You don't reinterpret it, you don't personalize it, you simply register it as information and move on. That emotional resilience changes how people interact with you because they sense you won't be shaken easily. And somewhere along the way, you realize the paradox has resolved itself. Once you stopped trying to shape outcomes, outcomes stopped controlling you. Once you became comfortable with uncertainty, connection became effortless, and that ease, quiet, unforced and real, is what most people mistake for luck. At this stage, you begin to trust time again. You're no longer rushing moments to reveal themselves. You allow things to unfold at their natural speed, knowing that anything forced eventually collapses. This patience isn't passive, it's deliberate. It signals that you're comfortable letting reality reveal its own shape without interference. You also stop interpreting attention as validation. Interest doesn't inflate you. Distance doesn't deflate you. Both are simply movements, not measurements. And because your sense of self isn't tied to either, your reactions remain steady. That steadiness becomes the quiet center others feel when they're around you. What changes most is how little explanation you feel compelled to give. You don't narrate your intentions, you don't clarify your value, you don't convince, you act and let action speak, and in doing so, you remove the noise that once diluted your presence. You notice that people reveal more around you, not because you pry, but because you don't pressure. When there's no expectation to perform or impress, honesty surfaces naturally, and that honesty gives you clarity without effort. Your boundaries become effortless. You don't announce them, you don't defend them, you simply live in alignment with them. When something crosses the line, you adjust your involvement quietly. No drama, no speeches, just movement. This is where your energy becomes unmistakable, not loud, not dominant, but grounded. You don't borrow confidence from outcomes anymore, you generate it internally. And internal confidence doesn't fluctuate with circumstances, it remains consistent regardless of response. You begin to recognize how much of modern interaction is driven by fear. Fear of being overlooked, replaced, misunderstood. When that fear is absent in you, it creates contrast. People feel less guarded, less defensive, less reactive in your presence. You also realize that connection feels lighter when it's not carrying the weight of expectation. Conversations feel cleaner, laughter feels genuine, silence feels neutral instead of tense. There's no invisible contract being negotiated beneath the surface. At this point, you're no longer impressed by intensity. You value coherence. You look for alignment between words, behavior, and consistency over time. And that discernment protects you from getting pulled back into dynamics that once drained you. And without chasing this transformation, you find yourself living differently. Not harder, not colder, just clearer. You're no longer trying to be someone worth choosing. You're someone who knows where he stands. And from that place, everything else either aligns naturally or fades without resistance. What becomes obvious now is that you're no longer reacting, you're choosing. Choosing where to invest time. Choosing who gets access. Choosing when to walk away without turning it into a statement. That agency changes how you experience everything. Life stops happening to you and starts unfolding with you. You stop needing emotional peaks to feel alive. Drama no longer registers as excitement. Uncertainty no longer feels seductive. You've seen where those roads lead, and the cost is no longer worth the stimulation. Calm stops feeling boring and starts feeling rich. People around you begin to adjust unconsciously. Some slow down, some lean in, some drift away, and you let all of it happen without interference. You no longer chase alignment. You allow it to reveal itself through behavior over time. There's a quiet confidence that emerges when you stop outsourcing meaning to interaction. You don't replay conversations. You don't analyze responses. You don't guess intent. You observe what's consistent and move accordingly. That clarity removes emotional clutter from your mind. You also become harder to mislead, not because you're suspicious, but because you're present. You notice shifts in tone, changes in effort, inconsistencies in follow-through. And instead of confronting them, you respond with distance or depth, depending on what's warranted. This is where discernment replaces hope. You no longer assume potential equals reality. You wait, you watch, you let patterns speak, and that patience saves you from repeating cycles that once felt inevitable. Interactions now feel lighter because you're not carrying expectation into them. You don't need moments to become memories or conversations to become commitments. You enjoy what's there without reaching for more. And that enjoyment feels genuine because it's not conditional. You also stop explaining your calm to people who thrive on reaction. You don't justify your steadiness. You don't defend your pace. You let others project whatever they need to, and you keep moving without absorbing it. At this point, attraction feels mutual or non-existent. There's no middle ground filled with confusion. Things either develop naturally or they don't. And when they don't, you let them go without internal resistance or lingering attachment. What you've really gained isn't ease with others, it's peace with yourself. You're no longer negotiating your value through interaction. You're no longer defining yourself through response. You're simply living from a place of alignment and letting everything else sort itself out. What surprises you most is how natural this new way of moving feels. There's no constant self-monitoring anymore, no internal debate about whether you said the right thing or showed enough interest. You act in alignment with how you feel, and that congruence removes friction from everything you do. You also stop romanticizing struggle. You no longer believe that tension equals meaning or that uncertainty equals depth. You've learned that stability isn't the absence of passion, it's the foundation that allows passion to exist without chaos. That understanding quietly reshapes what you're drawn to. People sense when you're no longer trying to be perceived a certain way. There's a grounded neutrality in how you show up. You're open but not exposed, present but not available on demand. That balance makes interactions feel earned instead of automatic. You begin to enjoy walking away without bitterness, not as a tactic, not as a statement, but as a natural response when something doesn't align. There's no urge to convince, correct, or be remembered fondly. You let experiences end cleanly, trusting that what's meant to continue will. This is where emotional independence becomes visible. You're not detached, you're selective. You care, but you don't cling. You invest, but you don't overextend, and that moderation keeps your energy intact instead of scattered. You also realize that most confusion in the past came from wanting clarity too soon. Now, you let time do the sorting. Time exposes intention, time reveals consistency, and by allowing things to develop at their own pace, you save yourself from misreading moments as promises. The calm you carry now isn't something you talk about, it's something others feel. Conversations slow down, reactions soften. There's less defensiveness around you because there's nothing to push against. You're not trying to control the exchange. You're simply participating honestly. You stop being impressed by surface-level signals. Charm without consistency no longer moves you. Interest without effort doesn't hook you. You look for alignment that holds up when circumstances change, not just when things feel good. And when something genuine does appear, it feels easy without feeling shallow. There's no need to manufacture momentum. No rush to label or define. It unfolds naturally, supported by mutual steadiness instead of emotional urgency. By now you understand the real shift that happened. You didn't lower yourself or give up. You let go of illusions. You stopped negotiating your worth through reaction and response. And from that place of internal clarity, connection stopped feeling like work and started feeling like a choice. There's a noticeable shift in how you relate to outcomes now. You don't cling to them, you don't fear them. You understand that not everything is meant to turn into something permanent, and that understanding removes the emotional weight that once made every interaction feel high stakes. You become comfortable letting moments be just moments. A good conversation doesn't need to become a future plan. A spark doesn't need to turn into a story. You enjoy what's real in front of you without reaching ahead or holding on too tightly. This ease changes how others experience you. They don't feel evaluated. They don't feel rushed. They don't feel like they have to perform. And when people feel unpressured, they reveal themselves more honestly, sometimes more than they intend to. You also stop mistaking emotional noise for connection. Big reactions no longer impress you. Intensity no longer confuses you. You've learned that depth shows up in consistency, not volatility, and that lesson reshapes what you allow close to you. When interest fades, you let it fade. When curiosity grows, you allow it space. You don't force continuity, and you don't resist endings. That flexibility keeps your inner world balanced instead of reactive. What once felt like confidence now feels like calm acceptance. You don't need to dominate a room or withdraw from it. You're comfortable occupying your space without shrinking or expanding to fit expectations. You notice that conversations feel more grounded. There's less pretense, less signaling, less guessing. You speak plainly, listen carefully, and move on when things no longer align. That simplicity becomes your signature. At this stage, attraction feels mutual or non-existent, nothing ambiguous in between. There's no lingering confusion because you're no longer projecting hopes onto behavior. You see what's there and respond accordingly. You begin to appreciate how much mental energy this shift has freed. No overthinking, no rehearsing, no replaying moments. Your attention returns to your life, your goals, your direction, where it always belonged. And in that return, something important locks into place. You didn't change who you were to make things easier. You removed what was weighing you down. Once you stopped carrying expectations that weren't yours to hold, connection became lighter, clearer and honest. By now you understand that nothing magical happened overnight. There was no sudden transformation, no external upgrade, no secret move. What changed was internal orientation. You stopped asking life to meet you halfway before you stood on your own feet. And once that happened, everything else rearranged itself naturally. You no longer measure progress through attention or response. You measure it through peace, through how little mental space is occupied by uncertainty, through how easily you can walk away from what doesn't align without needing justification or reassurance. There's a quiet confidence in knowing that connection is optional, not essential. You enjoy it when it appears, you respect it when it leaves, and because you're not dependent on it, you're no longer distorted by it. This is where discernment replaces hope. You don't fantasize about potential anymore. You look at behavior, consistency and alignment over time, and that patience saves you from mistaking chemistry for compatibility. You also stop fearing misinterpretation. If someone misunderstands your calm as disinterest, you let them. If they mistake your steadiness for distance, you don't rush to correct it. You trust that the right people recognize stability when they encounter it. The energy you carry now isn't sharp or aggressive, it's settled. You don't need to dominate interactions or retreat from them. You participate fully, but you're not entangled, and that balance keeps you centered regardless of outcome. What once felt like scarcity now feels abundant, not because there's more around you, but because you need less. Your fulfillment no longer hinges on response, approval, or momentum. It comes from alignment with your own direction, and when connection does happen, it feels clean. No hidden contracts, no pressure to perform, no urgency to define. Just two people meeting without pretense, each responsible for their own emotional weight. Looking back, you realize the paradox resolved itself quietly. The moment you stopped trying to position yourself favorably, you became grounded. The moment you accepted where you stood, you stopped being pulled off center by reaction and response. So the real shift wasn't about how others behaved, it was about how you moved. You stopped chasing validation and started living in alignment. And from that place, everything that enters your life does so by choice, not force. That isn't giving up, that's arriving. Dom